Good evening, everyone. Hi, my name is Heather Thompson, and I'm the interim CEO at the Data Lab, and I'd just like to welcome you all to our event tonight. Just before we start, apologies for my notes, I've got lots of things I need to tell you. So there's no fire drills planned for this evening, but if there was, with the doors just out there, so just out there and turn to our left. I thank you to LiveAir for live streaming the session to our online audience, who we've got signed in at the moment. And tonight we're here to talk about data and AI in the public sector. So we hear a lot about the adoption of data and AI across industry. I think it's a really important thing to highlight and make people aware of the innovation and opportunity that's taking place in the public sector. So tonight there's going to be a range of discussions around how new and existing tech in data and AI are reshaping governance, service delivery and the decision-making processes in public sector organisations. We have presentations from Scottish Government, from Research Data Scotland and from Police Scotland. So a real range of perspectives and insight into what's happening in the public sector at the moment. The speakers are going to showcase real-world examples of how data and AI is being used in their line of work. And the event format is that we're going to start with a series of presentations. There will be an opportunity for 1 or 2 questions after each presentation, but then we'll move to a panel discussion with all of the presenters up, and I'll be chairing that panel session. So before we kick off, just a reminder, this event tonight is being hosted by the Data Lab community. Our community has just around 5,000 members now from around, over 80 countries across the world. When we started this out, it was very much thought of as being a community for Scotland with potential interest in the UK. But very quickly we attracted interest from across the world. And that has just grown exponentially, and it's really great to see that activity taking place and the networking and opportunities that are coming through internationally. It'd be really great if you want to post on socials tonight and tag the Data Lab. I believe, do we have tags here? Not on screen. Okay, so our tags? At TDL Community. At TDL Community. I'm missing that. And the Data Lab community are our handles. Okay. That's somehow managed to delete itself from my brief. So, so without further ado, I would like to welcome our first speakers for tonight. We have Police Scotland, and this is a joint presentation. So we have Harry Schoen, who's the Data Science Coordinator. He leads on data science and AI activity across the force. He's responsible for ensuring Police Scotland utilise the best tools and techniques available to maximise value from their existing data, as well as develop innovative new capabilities, all in a consistently responsible, transparent and ethical way. And he is joined tonight by Amarpreet Kaur. Amarpreet is a data scientist, and prior to Police Scotland, she was working for Leicestershire's police cyber team, and therefore has a varied perspective on police organisations. So, over to you.
Thank you very much. Should I just press this? Oh, here we go. So we don't have very much time for this presentation, so it's going to be very quick, hopefully give you an overview of different aspects of AI in relation to policing, and then hand over to Amarpreet, who will talk through some specific use cases that we're actually working on in Scotland, so you get a perspective of what it's like to be a data scientist working within a police organisation. So some common uses of data science and AI in policing, computer vision, so some of these will be very well known, facial recognition, ANPR, things like AI-enabled drones. We're now getting things like drone first responders, so where you have a 999 call and it's, say, a traffic accident, we can, not in Scotland, but other parts of the country and other parts of the world, we can automatically send drones to survey the scene, pick up how many people are involved in the accident, what the traffic implications are, and you can use drones for a whole bunch of other stuff, particularly AI-enabled drones, things like picking up disturbed earth if you're looking for a body, or things like identifying changes in the landscape that might indicate environmental waste, so fly tipping and different kinds of dumping of stuff. NLP, things like digital forensics, so sifting through huge, vast amounts of data that are recovered from devices. Summarization, the use of text logs. We basically, within policing, as within many other organizations, have a huge amount of unstructured data that contains a vast amount of detail and interesting stuff, but which we can't get value from because it's very difficult to extract that, and we would be looking to use NLP to do that. Predictive analytics, so people get hung up, I think, a little bit on predictive policing, predicting where crime is going to occur, predicting kind of low volume events like murders or stabbings or something like that. But when we think about predictive analytics within a policing context, we're really talking about things like, can we predict the number of calls that we're going to get? Can we predict reoffending potential? Can we predict where there might be offense escalation? And what's kind of what distinguishes one offender at the beginning of their kind of offending career from another offender that might mean that we want to intervene or we want to signpost that individual? How can we predict vulnerability? How can we design effective interventions that protect vulnerable people and keep them safe? Automation. So police officers and police staff currently spend an enormous amount of time doing tasks like redaction, compiling reports, linking different reports manually, so intelligence about a particular location, a particular individual, and all that sort of stuff can be automated, can save gigantic amount of time, and much more. So, you know, the police, like anything else, is a large corporate organization with a HR function, with a finance function, with a legal function. There's a huge potential in there for the sort of AI-enabled productivity improvements that we see in most organizations. AI assistants. What we also have is a bunch of kind of interesting bespoke data, so things like ANPR data. An interesting use case is using machine learning to identify suspicious journeys. So this is something that they did in the northwest of England. Basically did some unsupervised learning on ANPR data, identified anomalies, found that it was unusual for vehicles to be driving a long distance and then turning around immediately, then did lots of exclusions, so excluded taxi companies, excluded haulage, and essentially uncovered a human trafficking operation because people were driving to airports, picking people up, driving back really far, immediately turning around and going back to the airport. They then linked that data to the flights that were arriving at that time, got the manifest of the flights, were able to identify potential victims of human trafficking. So that kind of thing is really impactful. I will skip through because we've got not very much time and talk a little bit about threats to policing because this is also very interesting. So policing, like any other organization, but also we will have some responsibility for this, is going to have to deal with a far greater degree of AI-assisted cyber attacks in the future, and the speed and scale at which these attacks can be done is terrifying. AI-enabled criminality. So I think people will be quite aware of the variety of different ways in which fraud is evolving, but we are seeing some really terrible stuff in relation to the hyper-realistic kind of Gen AI side of things that can really enable intimate partner abuse. It can enable the creation of kind of child sexual exploitation material, really, really, really nasty stuff. There's a potential for reduced policing capacity, just because we're going to have to be dealing with the kind of the scale of the demand change in some of these areas from the previous category. There's the kind of harder to measure but quite distinct danger of pervasive misinformation, targeted campaigns around elections, targeted campaigns around stirring up hatred in certain communities, and obviously policing is going to deal with the kind of consequences of that. And finally, the opportunity for people to basically radicalize larger numbers of people a lot easier. It kind of reduces the barriers of entry for things like grooming, and that is, again, another thing that we're going to have to get ahead of. What are we doing as an organization? So we obviously have mainstream AI-enabled policing solutions. So we have some facial matching The facial matching we use in Scotland is retrospective. It's not live facial recognition or anything like that. We've got a number of research collaborations ongoing. I can talk about them with people afterwards if you'd like to come up and talk to me about them. We run events. We recently ran a hackathon. We ran a competition with the University of Edinburgh. We often take on MSc students and PhD students for internships. We took on 3 MSc students and a PhD student last year. We have 2 interns coming later on in the summer. We are hiring this year. I don't have a date for when the jobs will be available, but if anyone is interested, please talk to me and I will take your email and keep you updated on that. And we have a number of specific use cases, which I will now pass over to Amapreet to discuss.
Hi. So one of the first projects I ever worked on for Police Scotland was with the human trafficking team. We worked with them to understand what they were doing on a regular basis to see where we could improve the way they were working or make things more efficient. So we realized that they were manually entering data from PDFs into Excel. And so we built a very simple tool that would scrape the data, pick out key entities and populate a table and provide a brief summary of what the PDF was on about. And we've realized that saving that team about 230 hours a year in manual entry. And we're still working with that team to help improve efficiencies and preventing manual entering of data or searching for data. Another project we're working on is looking at the factors influencing the average speed of answer for 999 calls. So the target is usually 10 seconds. Sometimes we go past that and we want to understand why that's happening. So we did some statistical modeling with policing data and non-policing data, such as weather, inflation rates, NHS data that was available publicly. And we've made a model to predict the average speed of answer. And we found that the factors that we thought might influence the average speed of answer, such as like football matches in Scotland, wasn't actually as important. For example, bonfire night was more significant. And now we've got some statistical modeling and some work behind that to back the theories that we've had and the thoughts that we've had. Another factor that we didn't think was going to influence average speed of answer was inflation. And that proved to be important, along with A&E wait times as well. So that's quite important to the average speed of answer and how quickly a call is answered. And then I'm a big fan of, my interest lies in LLMs and NLP. So a future project that I'm hoping to work on is using OpenAI models with data, but that's quite controversial. We want to be safe in doing that. So a workaround I've found is using publicly available police data, which is freedom of information requests. So that's publicly available of requests of information, which we're hoping to scrape the responses for, feed that into an LLM, and produce so we're using the Gemma model and produce a chatbot basically to help the stats team with simple questions like, has this FOI ever been asked before? If it has, then it saves us time repeating the same tasks again and again. So a simple chatbot. So we're not using OpenAI models for sensitive policing data because that's not ethical at the moment. We don't know what's being done with this data, but a workaround is any publicly available information. We're going to see if we can prove the benefit and the use of these LLMs and having that environment to work with them. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have we got time for one question at the moment? Has anyone got an immediate question? No, you've got lots of time to think ahead of the panel session. I've got one question for you. You talked, Harry, about automation. One of the things that you were doing, and I think you touched on it well, and how you've been making efficiencies. From an automation perspective, would you say you're moving towards a stage, or have you already reached a stage where roles are becoming redundant due to the amount of automation, and/or are you at a point where you're actually having to create new roles to bring in the skills for the automation, or is it really about how to make the job more efficient going forward?
I'll answer that. I think we're in between those two positions. I think it would be a relatively nice situation to be in, where we had enough automation that we were, even having that difficult decision of redundancies. What the position that we're in is that numerous people, police officers and police staff, spend far too much time doing stupid tasks involving manually moving information from one document to another document, manually redacting things, manually summarizing things, manually emailing the same reports to the same people every week. And the main thrust with automation has been, how can we get these people doing their jobs, doing the things that they actually, that they think that they're meant to be doing, that their job description says they're meant to be doing, that frankly we're paying them to do. We've got kind of a couple different strands to our automation. We have a robotic process automation program, which has been focused on vetting and firearms, these sort of repeatable, regular processes that we need to go through. We have the work that Amarpreet was discussing around how can we look at specific processes in kind of high impact areas and speed up the kind of manual elements of that, so those teams can focus on things like human trafficking and labour exploitation and child sexual exploitation is another area that we've looked at that. And then we have specific tools that we've brought in that are basically indexing tools that look at things like data retention. Do we have documents that we shouldn't have on people's devices that we need to automatically delete? All of these sorts of things that would require massive manual intervention that we've been able to automate, but we're not at the stage where anyone's job has been made redundant.
Time for a quick question, yep.
Thank you. So you were talking about before about predictive analytics, and when we're talking, for example, about certain locations that this is based on previous data that you have. So how do you cope with bias on this? Because
Yeah, so it's a really well-known problem. I would say that I was starting quite general in terms of how police forces use AI, and we don't at the moment. We don't have a predictive policing model. We're not implementing that. We're not developing that or using that. We have done some work around hotspot policing, but you can do that stuff manually. That's kind of well established. I think it's a really big conversation about bias in our data, and it's probably the reason why we've shied away from the predictive policing model. I don't think that the evidence is there at the moment, at least in relation to the other high-value work that we could be doing. But I'd be very happy to have a long conversation with you about bias in our data afterwards, if you'd like.
Great, thank you. We don't have time for any more questions now. We'll move on to our next presentation, but save those questions up for later. I'll let you take your seats.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to invite up Jen Campbell, who is Digital Delivery Lead for Research Data Scotland. Jen is responsible for the delivery of digital services, including the new Researcher Access service, which she's going to tell you all about. Prior to joining Research Data Scotland, she was responsible for delivery of digital services at Scottish Government, and before that has experience in technology consultancy in the financial services. Over to you.
Hi, I'm Jen Campbell. I'm the Digital Delivery Lead at Research Data Scotland. So today I'm going to talk a wee bit about who is Research Data Scotland, what is it we do, just as a bit of an intro, and then specifically a little bit about the Researcher Access service. So I'm kind of focusing more on the data side than the AI side today. Oh, cheers. Sure. So Research Data Scotland, what we're about is unlocking the power of public sector data to make it quicker and simpler to do research and improve lives. We are an independent charitable organisation. We're created by the Scottish Government, and we're a partnership between public sector bodies and universities, really kind of working across the data sector with this mission in mind. So why did RDS come into being? Well, some of the problems that we're trying to solve, data is often locked away in lots of individual systems across lots of different organisations, and it's quite often in formats that make access to it or integrating data across those different organisations not very easy. So if you want to do research to find out some really important things using that data, it's not very straightforward a lot of the time. So what we are trying to do is help researchers by giving them the information, the advice and the tools that they need to be able to speed up and simplify their work so that we can actually get to those research insights quicker. Because that's really the value of the data, or one of the values of the data is getting to insights that make a difference to us in our lives, whether it's health or education or other topics. And we're doing that in a lot of different ways. So first of all, we're trying to help researchers actually get access to the data. We're trying to widen the range of data that's available to them. We are aiming to create a single point of contact for safe, secure and effective access to public sector data. So it's quite a complex landscape at the moment. We're trying to do our best to simplify that and kind of bring that together. And also provide some leadership and coordination within the Scottish data landscape. So we really are kind of an organisation of partnerships. We work with lots of different organisations across public sector, third sector, universities, and try to kind of bring things together to improve it. So what we're working on, we can kind of broadly categorise into two big buckets, being sort of systems, so the how does it work, how do you get access to data, and then the data itself, so what is available, what data sets, and kind of what specifically is in them. So what I'm talking about today falls more so into the kind of systems side, but touches on the data side as well. So the Researcher Access Service is a new service that we've launched recently, which I'm going to talk a little bit about. And basically the aim of the Researcher Access Service is to make it faster and simpler to access data to support research in the public good. The service that we've developed operates securely, lawfully, and it offers an improved end-to-end experience for front and back-end users while reducing errors and duplication. That's the vision that we've been working towards. We're very much on a journey. We're agile, we're iterative, but we're working towards this kind of overall vision for our service. This is a kind of overview, I suppose, of the journey that we're talking about within the Researcher Access Service. What is it that researchers are actually trying to do, right from the point where they are trying to discover what data is available to them, what can they actually access, what is there out there. So we are trying to improve the information about that. What processes do you need to follow? It is quite complicated sometimes, so trying to help people navigate that. We have an inquiry stage so that people can come in and say, look, this is the data I want to access. I think I want to do this project. I think I might need access to these data sets. Can you help me? We've got a risk-based triage at that point to decide whether, basically what level of approval that needs. Some projects need more scrutiny. Some projects maybe can go through this more streamlined approach. We've then got a digital application process for the first time. I don't know if anyone in here has been through some of these processes before, but there's lots of Word documents that go back and forward and track changes and all sorts. So our new service kind of does away with that, and we've got this kind of digital platform where you can make your application, you can manage it, you can track it, you can communicate with the team that support it, and hopefully do that in a bit more of a streamlined way. The data that we're talking about here in this process is accessed via the National Safe Haven, which is a really secure environment for accessing sensitive data. That's kind of the scope that we've got at the moment, is that through this process you would only access it in the National Safe Haven. And finally, the output stage, that's really thinking about what do researchers actually do with this data. So when they get to the point of coming up with some research insights, wanting to pull them out so they can start publishing papers and things like that, how do we make that transparent so we can kind of show what the value of the data is and what's being done with it. And also it's really important to be transparent because this is all of our data, right? And we should know what's being done with it. So underpinning the Researcher Access Service, and actually a lot of the processes out there for getting access to public sector data, is the 5 SAFEs framework. So safe people, are the researchers safe to access the data? Are they trained? Are they accredited potentially? Safe projects, is the research that's being proposed okay to do? It doesn't seem like it's going to cause harm to people. Safe settings, so something like the National Safe Haven or other safe environments, trusted research environments where you can't take the data out, you can't be taking it away with you. Safe data, have you minimised what you need to access? That's really important. You're only accessing the data that you really need to do the research that you've proposed. And then finally, safe outputs. So that's around making sure that what's actually released at the end of your research, what's released and published, doesn't identify anyone, and you're not doing harm to anyone as part of that. So the Researcher Access Service as it currently stands, this is our first release, as I've said. It's an end-to-end digital journey, a simpler approvals process than the one that kind of currently has existed. It's supported by a team in Public Health Scotland called the IDRIS team, who are really the experts in this. They've been doing this a long time, and it exists alongside existing approval pathways, and it's a sort of alternative route for projects that fit the right kind of scope at the moment. As it stands, we're providing access to 9 data sets, which are listed there. They're primarily health data sets plus birth and death registrations. Those are some of the most commonly used health data sets. So while it is a sort of specific set of data, there's a lot of research that can be done, just with different kind of combinations, data linkage across these different data sets. So if you're not kind of familiar with this kind of research, if you don't work in this area, you might be wondering, what could you actually do with this? What type of research are we talking about here? So one of the things before we launched the service was we offered some funding to researchers. It was called the Accelerator Awards, and it was to help encourage people to kind of look at the potential of this and look at the potential of these data sets. So we've got lots of great applications and funded 3 projects which are currently kind of working their way through the system at the moment. So the 3 projects that we funded, it wasn't kind of by design. They've all ended up being kind of in the area of mental health, mental illness. Just, I suppose, a feature of the fact that that's one of the data sets that we're offering. But as you can see, there are some really important, really kind of impactful research that can get done using these data sets. So these researchers are going through our process at the moment, and we're really looking forward to seeing kind of what they do and the insights that they hopefully manage to get at the end of this. So I'll not do a live demo or anything because I'm sure everyone knows that's a terrible idea. But I've got a couple of screenshots, I suppose, just to give a kind of flavour of what it is I'm actually talking about here. So initial inquiry stage, it's a really simple form. It's just asking for some details about the project that's being proposed. That allows that risk-based triage to happen. And if your project was then sort of triaged into the Researcher Access Service, you'd be invited to this online portal where you can manage your application, you can track it, you can kind of go back and forward with the team that are supporting it, and ask any questions that you have. We've got this kind of comments feature so that you can be kind of working on your application sort of collaboratively with the team that support it to get that through the process and get it approved, hopefully really quickly. And then in terms of our next steps with the Researcher Access Service, we're going to be continuing to develop and improve it sort of post our launch based on user feedback. We've been engaging with researchers a lot as part of this. We've done testing of the service kind of throughout the development. And we've been getting feedback already actually from our sort of Accelerator Award winners who've already been engaging with it, have been telling us how they've been finding it, and we're kind of already making changes based on that, which has been super helpful. And we're really keen to continue engaging with researchers. So if anyone in here kind of fits that category, please feel free to say hello at the end, and I can let you know how to do that. We are also seeking opportunities to expand the range of data sets that are available through the Researcher Access Service. So that's looking at other public sector organisations, other types of data outside of health potentially. And we're also mapping out the approach for other organisations and data controllers to kind of onboard to the service. Because I guess what I've talked about today is sort of the researcher side of kind of coming in and saying, I'd like to access this data. But you can think about it from the other direction, which is I'm a data controller, I've got data, I'd like to make that available through this route. And that's there's kind of a two-sided model, I suppose, that we need to work through. So that's all I was going to talk about today. I think the QR code there signs you up to our newsletter if you want to do that. Our website and things are up there as well. There's loads of information on our website about what we do, about the Researcher Access Service, and about all the other projects that Research Data Scotland has on at the moment. So yeah, I think that's me.
Thanks very much, Jen. Very quick practical question. A little bit about the process of applying. What about the timescales? Having worked in with academic research before, I know that sometimes access to this data can be quite a lengthy process. As part of what the Researcher Access Service is doing is trying to kind of break that down and minimise that time and make as well as making it easier, making it accessible more quickly.
Yes, absolutely. That's one of the key drivers, because what we heard from researchers kind of way back, almost at sort of the inception of RDS and the inception of this idea of the Researcher Access Service, was that sometimes you might get funding for a particular period and you could use up half of that time or more or longer, just on trying to get access to the data. That's not a good use of anyone's time. It's not a good use of funding. It's a problem that we heard kind of time and time again. So that's absolutely one of the aims. Because we're kind of still in this initial release, we've not sort of published any timescales yet. We want to sort of see how it beds in, I suppose. But in terms of so far, I'd say signs are pretty good. We're managing to get things sort of through the stages with the IDRIS support team quickly. It cuts out a lot of the kind of back and forth, I suppose, because everything's in one place. And the approval stage with the approvals panel is designed to be quicker as well. So I think once we've seen a few projects kind of go through end to end, we do definitely intend to publish some kind of indicative timescales, but the aim is absolutely for it to be faster, yeah.
Great, thank you. Any other one question before we move on to our next speaker?
Yeah, I'm interested. Is there any hopes to do stuff for like reproducible research, which is like if I'm going to go into your system and do something and my whole research, then is there a functionality for me to then, directly put that on GitHub or something so that, the whole scale of reproducibility of my research can be supported by the platform? Or
that is a very good question. I think it's definitely something we're looking into. It's not within the scope of what we've done at the moment. But I would probably be better to refer you to one of my colleagues in the data team. I can maybe chat to you at the end and pick that question up. But it is definitely, I know that the sort of reproducibility is a topic that's been looked at. Yeah. Sorry, I can't answer that better.
Great, thank you very much. I'll let you take your seat. Thank you. Okay. Time for our... So time for our final presentation of the night. We have Tom Wilkinson, who is the Chief Data Officer at the Scottish Government. Tom has extensive hands-on experience working across data science, data analytics, data engineering, software development, and he also has a wealth of experience in building AI capabilities across 5 UK government departments. So you're in very good hands here. So over to you, Tom.
Thank you very much, Heather. Is that working?
No.
Cool, thanks. Is that working? Yeah, okay, good. Now, I'm afraid we've not necessarily saved the best for last, but maybe we have saved the most general, and hopefully I can tie together those two stories from different bits of the public sector, because although I'm afraid I'm not going to say too many exciting things about AI, despite us looking after the Scottish AI strategy in our division. I think the really impressive stuff that Police Scotland have been doing is representative of innovative work happening across the public sector, and the concerns of RDS in helping bring together data sets safely and securely to get the most possible value out of them for the public, whether that's through research or through public services. These are also common concerns for organisations across the public sector. And what I want to talk about is the plumbing that helps make sure that those two concerns, the bringing data together safely and the innovative use of that data through AI, through other technologies, how that happens and how we're hoping to make that happen more effectively in future. Now, the diagram we've got up on the screen right now is a very, very crude and generalized representation of how data tends to flow around the public sector at the moment. We may have disparate digital public services and internal processes, which, even when they're talking about the same things, are completely disconnected. And they each generate data, and if that data is going to be used together to get a more complete picture from those two separate perspectives on the same thing, there is quite a complex and often ad hoc process of going through suitable protections and then bringing those data sets together where if there isn't any kind of identifier between them, we have to kind of use the data itself to try and understand where two lines of data are talking about the same thing and where they give us a more complete perspective on that thing in order to deliver more value around that thing. Now, there's been some pioneering work across health and care using Chi-number recently, which I think demonstrates what can be done and what can be done safely and securely protecting people's privacy, which is why I mentioned health and care here. But it's important to point out that this could be describing any of the public services that we enjoy every day as citizens of Scotland. Now, once that data is brought together, at the moment, it often goes into statistics, high-quality statistics, which are then released and can be the basis of decision-making and research for the public at large, helping shine a light on the nature of the country. But those statistics are infrequent, and so in terms of active, responsive decision-making, they aren't delivering the support that could be given to public services with a more active, dynamic feed of data. Now, on an ad hoc, sporadic basis, data does get pulled together into management information and business intelligence, and even used in analysis and machine learning and other things you might call AI on an ad hoc basis. So when it counts, this stuff does get done, but it's expensive and cumbersome to pull the data together. Now, the world that we want to move to is one where that crucial data governance, the protection of the data, is much more integrated into the flows of the data itself, so that it's not a stopping point, a bottleneck for bringing data together when it's appropriate to make sure that we're getting the most possible public benefit from having a fuller perspective on something that two different public data sets might shine a light on. Now, the benefit of starting to streamline the flow of data like that is that we go from a world where the combined data is on an infrequent basis to one where it can start to be used for more dynamic decision-making, or even fed back into those public services to help make those more streamlined, make them an easier experience for the people using them because the service itself is better informed. Now, crucially, part of bringing that data together stops being about mashing together data sets that have grown up separately describing the same things and starts to be about establishing shared data sets across the public sector that provide a reference point to recognize where the same thing is appearing in two different data sets. Now, that sort of shared reference point could be something like the work that we've been doing through the Scottish Government CivTech programme to establish a business spine, a sort of master list of businesses across Scotland, which can be used by multiple different separate organisations, rather than each of them maintaining their own list of businesses, which might be imperfect in its own ways, might miss some information. Now, once you've got that list of businesses for the business support functions across Scotland as we have it, you might start to imagine using it for other things to help coordinate services to businesses across different areas of Scotland, across different agencies. And that's the kind of objective that we're working towards. Now, it's worth highlighting that none of this is particularly easy, and that the wider we cast our ambitions to make that data work better together, the more challenges we face, at the same time as realizing more benefits. So that while we focus on Scottish Government exclusively, and we might expect to see some efficiency benefits from a clearer and more coherent understanding of the country through those different data sets, we're already starting to talk about needing to raise the training across Scottish Government to help build the digital skills to use the data in that way. As we move out to agencies and we think about making better decisions using different data sources, we also need to think about infrastructure and the potential cost of duplicating infrastructure across different organizations or duplicating the design of that infrastructure. And that's where sharing infrastructure more or sharing the patterns for infrastructure, for the design of systems, might help reduce the cost of using that data more effectively. As we move out to the wider public sector more generally and start to deal with even more disparate legal entities with different legal requirements around how to protect their data, we might achieve better coherence between public sector organizations, but of course we're incurring greater costs in terms of satisfying the often very sensible legal constraints about the reuse of that data. And that too is where we might hope that carefully designed digital interventions could help satisfy those legal requirements while at the same time minimizing the burden of administrative process. And then last, as we get out to the private and third sector, well, I think Jen's talked about this already in terms of Research Data Scotland, certainly for academia. So I'll not go too much further into that. But crucially, in coordinating all of these different organizations, we need new infrastructure on a governance level. And that's where we've been trying to innovate in terms of creating new fora, communities of practice across the public sector. And more recently, we have started to try and bring together public sector organizations to form a horizon group to establish a common vision for what we want to do with data in Scotland. Of course, itself targeted at the ambitions for Scotland as a whole set by our democratic political processes. Now, I should probably go into more detail about why we want to reuse data more across the public sector. Now, we've talked a little bit already about research and development, and we've talked about AI and some of the technologies coming online and perhaps underutilized already that could be delivering more benefit from our data. But I think it's worth thinking as well from a digital services perspective, thinking about all of the online services we use that are improved by having a bit more knowledge about us as we interact with them, and where that can be done safely and respecting people's privacy. I think it would be broadly appreciated that public services could offer the same sort of user experiences we might expect from tools we use every day. And then crucially, we every 10 years or so go through the census process to give us a deeper understanding of our population than we might get through the surveys we run in between. But that process itself is very expensive to deliver, and of course maintaining its quality as the rate of responses to surveys everywhere declines is a challenge in of itself. And there, part of a solution may be better use of the administrative data we have across the public sector, and it's one that we hope to explore as we reduce those barriers to the reuse of public sector data. To give an even more tangible example, a pilot application of AI that we ran a few years ago, working with some of our colleagues in the regulatory agencies for the environment, was to use AI on satellite imagery to estimate the harvest yields, which traditionally is a survey-based process, and one that puts a burden on farmers precisely when they are at their busiest, dealing with the harvest. And also one that involves a lot of administrative data from different public sector organisations. Now that pilot demonstrated the principle, but of course we might hope to take that further and integrate it into our processes, and of course draw on the wealth of expertise that might exist outside in the agri-tech sector. And so what we are pursuing at the moment is piloting of some of the technical innovations that might help us make that transition between those two different worlds of data, those two different flows across a number of different areas of public service, the natural environment, be that agriculture or other environmental concerns, again, potentially leveraging Earth observation data and other sensor data. The built environment, helping support services across the Scottish public sector, across local authorities around planning, and the business environment, where I've already talked about the start made on the challenge by CivTech of producing a business spine, a decisive list of businesses that different public sector organisations can share. And so we're intending to take that forward and help demonstrate the principle that, taken beyond the setting that it was developed in, it can provide a valuable resource for other public services to reduce the burden of keeping track of businesses separately. And that's me. Hopefully, for everyone in the room, that's painted a picture of how the potential for innovation across the public sector when data is brought together securely and efficiently can really be unlocked. And if anyone wants to know more, then obviously I'll take questions now, but I'd also welcome any questions afterwards. Thank you.
Does anyone have any immediate questions for Tom before we move into? No? Okay, I'm going to save my first question for the panel. So if I can invite everyone up to take a seat. As you can see, our mics haven't been working, so we've got a couple of roving mics to share between the panel at the moment. So if you just want to pass them between yourselves, that would be fantastic. So first question, Tom, I think just continuing a little bit further into what you were talking about. So it's clear from all of the presentations that there's a wealth of opportunity and a great deal of innovation in the adoption of data and AI technologies across the public sector. And you talk about, you know, as you kind of roll that out to the agencies and the local authorities, I think how do we raise awareness of the developments and share the learnings across the sector so that people don't go off and do their own thing, and before you know it, you've got duplication everywhere. Really trying to look at how we bring that all together to maximise impact and efficiency.
I think it's a great question, and you know, it might seem deceptively simple from the outside until you start to understand how many different agencies and organisations one might be talking about in the public sector. Some that maybe work behind the scenes without us really thinking about them until we need that service. And I think this event tonight illustrates some of the solution in forming communities of people who are interested in data, bring them together, making sure that they're aware of initiatives going on, and putting them in touch with other people that they can learn from and coordinate with. Alongside the excellent work of the Data Lab, as I'd mentioned during my talk, our own teams have been forming communities of practice, as well as supporting the digital data and technology technical professions across Scottish Government and used by the wider public sector too. Last of all, I'll take the opportunity to plug again the Horizon group that we are convening at the moment to try and get input at a strategic level to help understand a vision that everyone in the public sector can align behind.
Great, thank you. And you can speak to Tom later about that as well. I believe there's a couple of people here from Scottish Government as well, that there's expressions of interest open now for people who'd be interested in joining or finding out more about that Horizon group within the public sector. So, Harry, just drilling into that a bit more from the police perspective. You know, you're here tonight and you represent Police Scotland as a whole, but there's obviously the police authorities across the region as well. Do you find the same challenges in policing within people within the authorities doing their own thing, or is there a lot of consistency? People kind of look to Police Scotland as a central location for these sort of things to be rolled out?
Just to clarify, are you referring to the Scottish Police Authority or referring to police forces in England and Wales?
It doesn't really matter. It's about, you know, are you looking at, so from the Scottish Police Authority perspective, you know, if we look at Tom as an example, from the Scottish Government, you've got the Scottish Government and then you've got your local authorities, and what we're trying to do is roll out centralised approach, share learnings, duplication. From a policing perspective, do you find the same challenges within Scotland and beyond? Yeah, I mean, absolutely, and I'm glad that Tom mentioned in his talk infrastructure, because I think that there's a piece there about shared digital infrastructure, about even where there is a will to work together, it's just physically very difficult to share data. There isn't a shared space that people can work in. And I think that what Tom was getting at is more of a development of a kind of cross-sector consciousness, I guess I would describe it as, where you view things as problems that are societal problems rather than a specific policing problem or a specific social care problem or a specific health service problem. And I would put this back to Scottish Government, and it does feel from your presentations if we're on the same page here, that the Scottish Government role in this is to create the structures in which that consciousness can start to flourish. Whether that is through shared digital infrastructure, whether that's through a more unified approach to data governance, whether that's through even, maybe we can potentially have a conversation about this, cross-sector teams or more embedding of actual physical individuals in different organisations. Certainly from a policing point of view and from a personal perspective from my career within Police Scotland, it is very, very difficult to work cross-sector on a number of different problems, even when people really want to solve that problem. Okay, thank you. And just keeping on the topic of awareness at the moment, so we've talked about wealth of opportunity, but there's also a wealth of data available in the public sector, and Jen started to touch on that. But there really is a challenge with many people unaware of how much data there is and the ability to access that. So research access service, you know, it's going to help to raise the awareness, but how can we continue to do that? How can we continue to raise the awareness of the vast amount of data and the ability to access this valuable resource?
Yeah, so that's definitely a challenge. There's lots of data out there. There's data that exists as data sets that are ready to use. There's other data that isn't ready to use. There's different ways of accessing it. There's different routes in. You know, we in RDS, we have a metadata catalogue that we look after, that you can find some stuff in, but we know it's not perfect. We're going to do some more work on it to try and make it a better resource for people. But we also need to kind of join that up with the processes so that it's a sort of clean route in to both from sort of discovering the data and then going on to actually access it. But I think the lists of data sets, metadata catalogues, that kind of thing is sort of one angle on it, because not everyone necessarily would be in a position to kind of use that and access it. If you're new to doing research in that field, for example, there's quite a high kind of barrier to access there in terms of understanding. You quite often find, you know, people who work with this data all the time, they'll just rhyme off sort of names of data sets as numbers and variables and things like that, and then, you know, that's not very accessible generally to other people. So I think there's something about kind of bringing it to life a bit, and I think from my perspective that kind of takes us into that sort of life cycle of the data. So from what's available to what actually results from the use of that data, what insights do you get from it, what valuable research is done, what published research comes out of that, and then how do you kind of tie that back so that if you're someone who's kind of coming into this and you're thinking, what can I do with health data, what could I do with education data, for example, you can see real life examples, you can kind of tie that back and you can start to kind of build up a picture. But there's also, there's lots of work going on. I know that people from my organisation are working with Scottish Government colleagues and NHS colleagues around kind of findability of data and kind of building up the profile and kind of comms and marketing angles on that as well. So I think it's one of these things that we all sort of acknowledge is an issue, and there's lots of different sort of strands of work going on to try and tackle that. But I think a lot of the things that Tom touched on in the presentation as well, are around kind of building that picture and how it all joins up, kind of feed into that as well.
Great, thank you. So over to Harry. You spoke earlier about some of the current projects and opportunities for data and AI technologies in Police Scotland, but with so much of the dialogue around AI currently focusing on the ethics and privacies, could you talk a bit more about some of the challenges that Police Scotland has come up against in implementing these technologies?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I'll give two answers to the question. The first part is to do with ethics, and I think that Police Scotland is actually a leading police force within the UK in relation to our ethical procedures. We have two separate internal ethics routes for the adoption of new technology, but also the adoption of new projects. So if something meets a threshold, then it'll go through data ethics triage. If there's a public interest element to it, then we'll have public consultation. We also have an external data ethics group that has been set up with the Scottish Police Authority, or is about to be set up with the Scottish Police Authority. So I'm actually very comfortable with our position as a force in relation to data ethics. We have a data ethicist and a small team around her, which the majority of forces in the UK don't have. They don't have a specified role for that position, and we think very deeply about any new technology that we're procuring or any new projects that we're doing. However, in terms of implementation of data science and AI solutions, ethics is not really an issue for us because of those reasons. It's capability, it's funding, it's data quality, it's data access, it's culture within the organisation, it's access to skills, it's competing with the private sector for a limited pool of talent. There's a vast array of barriers that I think are more significant to us deploying AI solutions than some of the kind of ethics and privacy concerns. And I don't mean that to make it sound as if the ethics and privacy concerns are taken lightly. They're not at all. But we're not in a position where we can deploy things where we would even begin to worry about the ethical and privacy implications because we don't have the capability to do so in the first place.
Okay, and Jen and Tom, you both touched on ethics and safe use of data in your presentations. What are your views on whether or not there is potentially a role for further education in ethical use of data within the public sector? And actually, it's not about just waiting for the applications to come in, but actually being proactive about that and helping people to understand more about ethics. I know it's certainly something coming through with our academy programme across the universities. There's a huge variation in the level of ethics that's taught on data science and AI courses. Actually, some of it's quite surprising that people are learning these top subjects, but the ethics is maybe just a bolt-on module that they might happen to get if they choose it as an option. So what are your views within that and policies of that within the public sector?
So, like Police Scotland, we have a data ethicist in our wider team, and like Police Scotland, I think that's a step ahead of certainly proportionately the UK. I'd like to think, but one data ethicist, of course, doesn't cover all of the public sector sort of uses of data that we're hoping to support. And there, I think resources like yours to raise capability more generally become very, very important, as well as exploring new tools to understand the ethicality as perceived by the public of particular things we might do. And we have, over the last few years, used various participation approaches to get a better understanding of the perception of the public of data sharing and AI. including on the AI front. Our AI alliances work with Children's Parliament to understand from primary school children their perspectives on the ethicality of AI. Now, we're continuing to look out for new ways that we can use participation and funding research to understand the suite of tools out there that might make it more scalable while retaining the quality of tools that exist in the Scottish Government participation framework. But for me, it's that combination of education and skills to help make sure that ethics is a part of the skill set of public sector professionals working with data, as well as making sure that we have the tools to engage the public and understand what they deem ethical. And before handing it over, I will just expand on that skills point, that the digital data and technology professions that we have within Scottish Government and which are used by other public sector organisations do include, specifically especially for data scientists, an expectation of data ethics experience at all of the more senior levels. So that's not something that's just a bolt-on for some professionals who choose to explore ethics. It is an expectation for our digital data and technology professionals, regardless of other expectations.
Thanks, Jen.
Yeah, so I think obviously, as I touched on in my presentation, ethical use of data is really important in the processes that we're developing. I think in terms of the kind of skills angle there, I suppose the researchers that we kind of tend to work with, generally working in academic settings, I guess my experience so far has been that the levels is fairly high in terms of engagement with ethical issues. There's usually an expectation of kind of, ethics reviews and that kind of thing. There's lots of checks and balances built into the existing approvals processes, which is partly why they take a long time, but also into our more streamlined one. And what we're trying to do is support research that's in the public good. We've had lots of conversations about what is the public good, how do you define the public good, which I think kind of overlaps really into that kind of ethical use. And I guess it's one of these things that's such a big question, but then when you apply it to really specific examples, if you're talking about specific health research and things like that, that's when you get into more things like, potential for re-identification of individuals and things like that. But I think that, I suppose the bigger question is around, are there things that people want to do or might come to us and ask to do that would have risks not just associated with what they're doing right then, but maybe the things that could be done with that further down the line. For example, if their outputs were fed into AI tools or something like that. And I think it's that kind of bigger picture stuff that we really need to be kind of interrogating and sort of wrapping our heads around. But yeah, I guess in terms of the skills angle, I think it's something that it's really important. It's something that I think seems to be important in the academic sector from what I can see, but I suppose the challenges are constantly changing. So as you say, there's probably always room for more.
Great, thank you. Back to you, Tom. So the Scottish AI Alliance are tasked with delivering on the vision of the AI strategy in an open, transparent and collaborative way. And at the recent Scottish AI Summit, Mr. Lochhead announced the launch of the Public AI Register. Would you like to share a bit more about that and the intention of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the AI Alliance is an organisation, a partnership between Scottish Government and the Data Lab, as well as drawing in expertise from various academic and private sector sources to inform the delivery of the AI strategy that Scotland published back in 2021, ahead of a lot of other countries around the world. And that strategy and the Alliance have, like the Data Lab itself, drawn attention from around the world as an exemplar of how to make sure that dialogue around AI is focused on the ethicality, the trustworthiness, and the inclusivity of the technology, rather than maybe some of the extreme scare stories or utopianism that might exist in the public discussions of AI. Now, in terms of making sure that the Scottish public are well served in the uses of AI in the public sector, one of the tools that the AI Alliance has delivered is the Scottish AI Register, which is an online compendium of the various uses across the public sector. Now, of course, as I think I already described, civil servants are very busy people, and the process, although we've made it a very easy one for data to be entered into the AI register about the various use cases out there, of course, is an extra barrier to making sure that that list is comprehensive. And so the announcement by the Minister at the AI Summit in March that the register would become mandatory was part of the process of helping to make sure that we continue to move towards having, as envisaged, that transparency around the use of AI in the public sector that the register tries to embody. Now, of course, simply making something mandatory doesn't help all of our colleagues across the public sector over the hurdles of pulling together the information that's needed to make sure that it's a good, transparent account. So we're also working to make sure that the processes are as easy as possible, and that there's a community through the Scottish Public Sector AI Task Force to help with bringing that information together, as well as providing support in the potential applications of AI more generally that might have parallels between different organisations.
Great, thank you. And regulation has been and remains a really hot topic in the media, with varying views and approaches to this internationally. So it would be really interested to hear, as a panel, what do you believe are the main challenges to consider when we're thinking about regulation of AI?
I go. So I guess for me, I think one of the biggest challenges is kind of about the defining and the categorizing. So when we say regulation of AI, what do we actually mean? What does that encompass? Where does it start and end? There's tools that people have been using for years and years that are rule-based, for example. Now they're called AI. Is that included? Is it not? And then there's also the kind of general versus specific, and I think that's an important consideration as well. For example, you could be using AI to process scan images and identify a specific medical condition versus a really general kind of large language model, for example. And those are just two completely different things, I suppose. And I think sometimes the kind of discourse around it, and particularly the discourse around regulation, sort of conflates everything together, and I don't think that's always helpful. And to me, I think one of the biggest challenges is how do we get to a consistent and a common way of categorising and kind of grouping things in a way that we can all understand and we can kind of somewhat agree to, so that we're all sort of speaking the same language and we can apply sort of risk-based approaches to things that fall into different categories. That's what I would say.
I think that makes very good sense, and I've had companies try to sell me things as AI over the last decade, which I certainly wouldn't have counted at the time as AI and still don't. So the definition is certainly a challenge, although I think the most recent OECD definition makes a lot of sense. And we've seen some regulators like the EU AI Act take some of that structured tiered approach, trying to break things down with some degree of nuance in order to regulate AI proportionately according to the harm more than the specific technology involved. Now, Scotland it is not a setter of the regulations itself. Regulation of AI and other digital matters is reserved in the UK, which means that it's the Westminster government that makes the ultimate decisions there. The model that they're pursuing at the moment is one that that delegates the decisions around AI regulation to existing agencies for the most part, with some central coordinating support. But as our minister has said publicly, we do have concerns that the UK approach focuses resources too much on speculative uses of AI, as they might call frontier AI, and not enough on some of the immediate concerns that we've heard people raise here tonight and we've heard our panellists discuss. And the position of the Scottish Government has been to encourage the UK to make sure that the regulators for those different existing domains, including those in Scotland for our environment, for our education, are properly resourced so that they can have the skill sets in order to effectively regulate applications of AI in their areas.
Harry, final words from you?
Well, it's a little bit of a cop-out, but I don't think the police are allowed to have opinions about regulations. We tend to just follow them and enforce them. I think the one thing that I would add is I completely agree with what you're saying, particularly Jen, the way you set that up about the issue of definitions and thresholds and so on, is that there's a tension here where the public sector faces numerous problems compounded over a number of years, lack of funding, and then a feedback loop between the different services passing on demand to each other, and the police obviously bear a lot of this. And the one kind of bright spark has been the advance of technology, particularly the advance of automation, data science, AI, whatever different buckets you want to put it in terms of having a genuinely game-changing impact on productivity, on the way that people interact with services, on the way that services are delivered. And so the kind of tightrope that people are walking, or the tightrope that the Westminster government is walking, is how do you regulate to ensure the safe and effective development and deployment of this technology, whilst also still being able to harness that and still being able to actually improve services. And the one thing that I would be wary about is the strange shadow of regulation, I guess I would describe it as, where for whatever reason, probably to do with incentives, people in the public sector, at least in my experience, actually are more onerous in their enforcement of the regulation than the regulation itself. And a good example of this would be GDPR, and with kind of the pendulum is swinging back a little bit, but a lot of people for a number of years have used GDPR as a reason not to do things, when actually GDPR gave them plenty of license to share data, gave them plenty of license to use that data for various different purposes within their agencies. And that's why I'd be worried in relation to AI as well, that the regulation would be used internally as an excuse to be risk averse.
Thank you. And on that note, I would like to open the floor to any questions from the audience.
Cheers. Hi there. I was going to ask a question about, to what extent does data and AI innovation in the public sector, is it tied to the big companies in the sort of data landscape? So the Microsoft, Azure, sort of Amazon, AWS, Google, obviously. To what extent is any kind of data and AI innovation tied to those? Or is there an opportunity for people to explore different solutions and potentially ones that keep some of the economic benefits of that more local to Scotland?
I can quickly answer from a police perspective, which is that a lot of our estate isn't necessarily run by some of the big tech companies. They have a kind of patchwork of different providers, and certainly we've been very interested in, I don't really call it diversifying your procurement process, essentially being able to access the expertise of small and medium-sized enterprises, also being able to access the expertise of academia. There's probably a degree to which the infrastructure can't be delivered by smaller companies. You can hire data engineering, consultancies of a slightly smaller scale to do particular pieces of work. But in terms of delivering specific capability, I see the kind of smaller businesses almost as a more optimal solution, because they're people that are at the cutting edge of things. They're people where you are their biggest client, and I find that very useful when you're dealing with things. And there's a lot of talent kind of on your doorstep. So yeah, I would say that it's not necessarily in the hands of the big tech companies.
Yeah, absolutely. And I already mentioned today the CivTech program, which is a commercial mechanism the Scottish Government has in order to help make sure that SMEs and even startups can engage with challenges that the public sector has set with novel technical solutions. And I think the vast majority of CivTech challenges we've had over the last, over the lifetime of CivTech have involved AI in some way. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for the small private sector through CivTech and beyond that, because it's intended as a mechanism to create companies that can then go on to serve the public sector, and we have many examples of that happening. And although there's no denying that the big tech companies do play a significant role in providing technology, software to the public sector, and with the move to cloud, that's certainly not going to diminish. At the same time, through things like our digital data and technology profession, we are increasingly bringing the technical skills into the civil service as well. We have data scientists, as Harry and his team are a testament. And that means that we can be smarter customers and not rely quite so much on consultancies in order to help us assess whether something is the right technical solution for a particular challenge. But it also means we can build ourselves. And this is something that I've pursued across a number of UK government departments, obviously, building tools and working with SMEs and researchers to apply, I think it's reasonable to say, some of the most cutting edge AI technologies and things that I don't think the big tech companies could provide. And where I've provided Microsoft advice myself, I think my experience has been that they're not necessarily at the cutting edge of thinking and have their own constraints. So I myself would be wary to lean too heavily on big tech companies and assume that that they can deliver the same kind of technical proficiency that we might get from some of the smaller companies.
Jen, do you have anything to add?
I guess, from RDS's own perspective, we're a small organisation. We're also a very new organisation, so we're still kind of, working our way through all of our own kind of, technology and considerations. But I guess because we work sort of at that intersection of public sector and academia, I think we're exposed to a lot of stuff that's going on that is at kind of smaller scale, but is really exciting. And also in the kind of startup side as well. We're based out of the Bayes Centre, which is a great place for AI startups as well. So I think we're very much kind of in that environment and definitely open to working with kind of some of the really exciting stuff that's going on in Scotland.
Great, thank you. I've got another question at the back. Sorry, I should have said as well, if you'd like to just say who you are and where you're from before you ask your question.
Yeah, hi, I'm Gala. Maybe I'll follow from that, and maybe what I see in public sector, the big tech companies maybe don't scare me as much as the big consultancies, because you mentioned, you think about ethics in your own work, but in procurement, and some of what I see is that for example, I think about this register, and it's like they will register the AI that they use, but they will also the register include things that they have procured that has AI, because a lot of those are black boxes. And I guess I'm interested in understanding what you have seen in the side of how internally you regulate that the same ethics and kind of standards you are following are also being followed on the side of the procurement with consultants, I think, because to me, the tech companies are a little bit more mainstream, like they offer a service that they offer in the world, so it's a little bit, but the consultancies are doing really specific work for you and actually taking a lot of your intelligence and outsourcing it. There's, big books like Mariana Mazzucato and stuff talking about that, and I'm interested in talking about that because I think that can be more, have more tentacles.
Who would like to take that one?
So I'll struggle with her name, but I know the research you're talking about, and I wasn't surprised to hear it mentioned at the end of the question. I have had healthy working relationships with consultants, but at the same time, I think there are some truths in that kind of discourse, and I think the public sector does need to be a smart buyer when it comes to working with consultancies, and not to lean too heavily on them for too much, while making the most of some of the flexibility that can come from having consultants rather than full-time staff. Personally, I think that's best done from smaller, more specialist consultancies rather than big general ones that, to my experience, hire very similar people to the civil service.
Sorry, I just wanted to add there that, for example, in CivTech, even though it's supposed to be for small businesses, in one of the challenges, I think CivTech 8, ACOM took 3 of the challenges, for example. So it's for small businesses, but that's not exactly how it runs. So even some of the funding the Scottish government's putting for that is then going back into those big consultancies.
I hear what you're saying. I mean, if part of the business model of those big consultancies is to find opportunities to sell services to the public sector, I think it's always going to be a bit of a tug of war between managing how much work goes to those companies compared to what smaller specialist consultancies can attract because they have a more limited marketing budget. And I think the same is true of big tech companies as well. I wouldn't necessarily draw a hard line between them in terms of the problems introduced by aggressive business development and marketing of services to the public sector. But at the same time, I wouldn't completely write off the potential contribution, as long as in sort of the phraseology of the research you're referring to, as long as we don't let civil servants be infantilized by use of those consultancies and become too dependent on them, as long as we continue, as Scottish Government is doing, to recruit technical specialists itself and to develop frameworks through which those technical specialists can provide advice to their less technical colleagues across the public sector, to make sure that where we are buying services, we're doing so as a sophisticated customer, and we're not investing too much faith in what is ultimately a profit-motivated organisation to do the public-motivated things that we are trying to achieve. And beyond that sort of skills-based approach to having a healthy relationship with the private sector, there's also work we're doing with our colleagues in the procurement functions within government to try and make sure that when it comes to data and AI, we are helping colleagues who are drawing up agreements with private suppliers to include the key conditions that will make sure that we discourage some of the behaviours that might develop if they're not carefully managed. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. In the interest of time, I'm just going to move on to what will be our final question. I think there was somebody over here had their hand up, so.
Hi, I'm Ailsa Cook from Matter of Focus. I'm interested, what do you think the time frame might be for the kind of more wide-scale adoption of AI tools within the public sector? So, for example, in this building, loads of people will be using AI tools for scheduling, for marketing and comms type functionality. So, like, when will people sitting in St Andrew's House or like Waverley Court be jumping onto ChatGPT because they want to get a briefing really good, or be using Superhuman, whatever, for their emails?
I mean, crucially, the guidance we have across Scottish Government and the UK Government encourages people to explore the use of Gen AI tools, including ChatGPT, providing that they're not putting sensitive information into those tools. So obviously no personal data, but also anything that might be politically sensitive. So I'd pretty much promise you that people in St Andrew's House and other government offices have already been using ChatGPT, and I'd expect that that's been appropriate to their work, and so that they've not been incurring any of the risks that might come from the use of those tools. The UK government has, I think, been a lot more focused on generative AI than we have in Scotland, where we recognise, I think, a broader spectrum of valuable AI technologies, and that generative AI is, in many ways, still being tested in its actual kind of business value. But that does mean that across the UK government, there is a lot of exploratory activity going on that we are watching to make sure that we can be confident of the value being delivered by these tools before we implement them fully. I won't go into detail here of the concerns around where the tools might add value and where they might actually cause harm, but that's a matter of kind of wide public discussion. Suffice to say, there is small-scale experimental use. There, through CivTech, for example, are some specific mature use cases for Gen AI, as well as across the public sector, some mature use cases of machine vision and machine learning and other AI technologies generally. But for LLMs particularly, we're watching the space keenly, and when we think there is a decisive benefit to their use, and that it's proportionate to the price of that tool, or the cost of us building it, because we are also experimenting with some of the open source models on our own hardware, then it will get more adoption.
Great, thank you. Harry, you've been nodding your head throughout that. Similar situation in policing?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's actually a link between the two previous questions. So for this question about when will we start seeing AI adoption, I suppose the answer is obviously that it's already here. And the timeframes for me is when are we going to start seeing AI improvements in services that's visible for members of the public, and when are we going to start seeing improvements internally in terms of productivity? And how that links to me with the previous question is that question was really about how do you regulate the implementation of a technology across a huge organization where basically any new thing that you bring into the organization is going to be, or say anyway, that it's going to have some form of AI in it. It's also about embedding. So for example, if we end up with Copilot licenses and you've got people in HR drafting their emails using that, or generating PowerPoints, or getting minutes auto-generated after meetings, that kind of organic, widespread use of AI is potentially fantastic, but incredibly hard to govern. You can set up all the kind of governance that you like around, giving people training, giving them responsible rules. Inevitably, people are going to do stupid things, but we need to take judgments as to what the trade-offs will be and how we get the benefit from that. And within Police Scotland, as I mentioned earlier, we have tried really hard with this ethics process, but it's very onerous, and we can't be everywhere at once. And that's kind of like a thing that most organizations, I think, are going to have to deal with, of just the pervasive nature of different AI. And it goes, I guess, back to the question about regulation, and where you're looking at the results of the technology, the intent behind it, the transparency of it, rather than just trying to catch every little piece of use. Sorry.
Thanks. Jen, final words from you before we wrap up the panel.
Sure. So yeah, I guess from an RDS perspective, I hope I'm right in saying I think we probably follow a similar approach to what Tom outlined, as in people will be using things for small bits of activity, but not putting sensitive information in there. I guess, again, it kind of comes back to that thing about categorization, and are we always talking about open tools that will take your data and reuse it for uses elsewhere, and you lose control of it? Or are there other options that we could be talking about? Could we be talking about things that are a bit more secure and still kind of getting the benefits out of it? I suppose that I think the point you made around kind of things like writing your emails and that sort of thing, that seems to be the route that we always kind of go down. I think we could probably think bigger than that. There's opportunities out there. That is one, I guess, in the sense of it's something that takes up a lot of our time. I listened to a good podcast episode recently where they talked about AI will make us all editors. for much more of our time, because you'd spend your time kind of deciding if it's right or not, and sort of working through what it's done rather than doing it yourself. So that's one angle, but I don't think it's the only angle. I think it's just the thing that we're all talking about at the moment, because things like ChatGPT are so kind of prominent. So yeah, I think probably kind of similar position. I think stuff's already happening. There's lots of use of AI in the widest sense already. But those kind of specific things, I guess, possibly a bit more time to sort of understand and see what the impacts are.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Do we have time for one last question, Stephen?
If it's quick.
Quick question, quick answers, please.
When you go to private, you have a problem that you want to solve. If you're working with the government, especially multi-government data sets. So, for example, I was very interested in your stuff about perinatal data and all of that, which came from different trusts, different hospitals, different data management systems. And but then if you're working across different government agencies, who comes to you, say, with something like, are these foster parents okay? And you have to get data from different agencies. But who starts that problem, and who brings it to you as a problem worth solving? So if you're in private sector, you go to somebody and you say, this is the problem, this is how I want to solve it, and you get something done. But if you're the owner of it, for example, is this person okay to issue a gun to? You have to go to various agencies to get that information from. All of those data sets exist, so you can extract your data to get a clearer understanding of risk assessment. But who starts that process off, and who then takes it through all the different government agencies and links up all the sets that you have?
Got time for one person to answer.
I'm happy to. Oh, well, she mentioned guns, Harry, which surely makes it a police matter.
Yeah.
I think the shortest answer would be that government, and particularly sort of core government functions like Scottish Government, and I'm sure within local authorities there will exist policy teams as well, will have different teams and individuals responsible for particular matters of public concern. And it's those individuals in the course of developing policy with elected officials and with the direction of elected officials who will be identifying some of these challenges and problems that they might take to CivTech, or might take to technical colleagues across government, or might put out to the private sector as a tender process. Does that answer the question?
I don't understand who I take the problem to.
You have identified problems that you want to solve. And you're not a public sector employee, or you are a public sector employee?
Yeah, but I own one part of it, and all the other government agencies own all the other parts of it.
So you're looking for a means of convening all of those different organisations around a shared problem.
Sorry, I know you said just one person.
That's all right.
I don't think this fully answers your question, but I guess just as a perspective on it, and this is more coming from my previous experience of kind of working on digital services within Scottish Government, I guess it's taking that service view. So you're talking about a problem that spans different agencies. I think what we're increasingly trying to do across the public sector is look at things as services, so a whole problem from the start to the end. So let's say it's something like a gun licence. That would be a service from the person deciding they need a gun licence to that being issued, and that service might touch lots of different places. And I don't think, we can't say absolutely everything operates perfectly in that way right now, but I think we're kind of working towards that across the public sector. So to take an example, one of the things I worked on was the setup of the social security benefits under Social Security Scotland, and that involves lots of different, there's an agency that governs the benefits, but they might need to get health information to confirm someone's disability benefits. So there is lots of cross-sector working already, and I think the move towards looking at things as whole services and as end-to-end problems, which involves people like service designers, I think that helps. I know it doesn't fully answer your question about how would you if you identified a specific problem, but I think that's, that there's teams that operate processes. Processes might be part of services. Services would then sort of be linked into policy, as Tom mentioned. and there would be kind of a chain that you could go through to raise that issue. I don't know if that helps, but I thought it was kind of relevant.
And most specifically, I mean, if you reach out to Scottish Digital, then that suggestion could be fed into the sort of the pipeline of stuff, and we could potentially help you identify the other steps along that service, if that makes sense. Because I appreciate part of the problem is just finding the email addresses of the other individuals to talk to, which is not a trivial problem.
Thank you very much. Okay. We definitely are out of time now. I can see everyone at the back frantically looking at their watches before we get thrown out of here. So I would just like to ask you to please join me in thanking our speakers and panellists for what has been a very interesting and insightful discussion. They're around if you've got any questions you want to ask them. I would also remind you about the community, and actually that's a perfect place for asking these questions. If to continue that discussion, take it onto the community platform where there's a lot more people who'd be really, really interested in joining that conversation. Just before we finish up, something that we wanted to launch tonight as part of our community meetups was an open mic to the audience. We have a very little time to do this tonight, but keen to kick it off. And the idea behind this is to give audience members 30 seconds on the mic to make an announcement, to promote any work that they're doing, to request support, or open up opportunities for collaboration. To kick it off, I'd just like to announce that we are currently working with one of our partners, Hippo, to organise a public sector data hackathon. They've already run some very successful hackathons already with Police Scotland, and if you would like to get involved by providing a challenge for the hackathon, then please get in touch with us at the Data Lab and we can connect you up to the right people. Is there anybody in the room who would like to promote something? Yep.
Hi, I'm Caroline Thompson. I'm actually one of Tom's team members. I'm in the AI policy team and we look after the Scottish AI task force. So any public sector organisations who would like to be part of that, we meet every 4 to 6 weeks and have a number of presentations and a bit of chat just about what's going on in the space and try and learn from each other. If you drop me an email at ai@gov.scot, we'll be able to get you joined up into that.
Great, thank you. There was one down the front as well.
Hi everyone. Oh, sorry. Hi everyone. I'm Chaz. I run a company called Fjelltop, and we are actually the small consultancy companies that got a lot of buzz earlier on. We're a data consultancy working in the public sector space, particularly focused on public health and social care data. And if anyone has problems and wants a solution, come and talk to me.
Great, thank you. And then one last one from Joyce.
Just a plea to everybody to scan that QR code and join the community. And when you get there, please sign up for the public sector community. I should have said I'm Joyce. I work alongside Tom. He is allowed out on his own, by the way. It's not that we just all follow him around. But I would like you to join that public sector community because that is where you'll find a link to the expression of interest form to the Horizons group, and also where we're hoping to host some events in the coming weeks and months that will talk about innovation and change in the public sector using data. So please sign up for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and just to expand on that, if you haven't already done so, what I didn't mention when I talked about the community earlier, that is you join the community, which gives you access to the global community, but then within that we have smaller subgroups set up with specialisms, one of which is public sector community that you can join, and probably many others that would be of interest to you, which are freely available for people to join. So all that's left for me to do now is to say thank you to you all for coming and joining us tonight. I hope you've enjoyed the event. Thank you to Live to Air for running the live stream. And again, I hope everybody who's joined us online has enjoyed the event. And just some upcoming events, a couple of slides. So the next events, and again, by joining the community, you'll be made aware of these. So on the 17th of May, we have an online event on the Preventable Deaths Tracker. And then our next in-person meetup is taking place on the 30th of May with a theme on health, and that's back at our host institution at the Base Centre at the University of Edinburgh. So that's us for tonight. Thanks again for coming, and if you've got any questions, please come and talk to us. Okay, thank you.